Blood, mixed with mud. The acrid smell of burnt flesh and unceasing screams filled the air. As the flap of the field tent opened, 4 alien doctors simultaneously turned away, then collapsed onto the cold ground. The Zarian medical ship Auroras was a marvel of interstellar engineering. Its organic design mimicked the flowing architecture of the Zarian homeworld, with walls that seemed to breathe and pulsate with life. Soft amber lighting bathed every corridor, calibrated precisely to reduce eye strain while maintaining optimal visibility. Dr. Gizzo stood by the viewport, his slender, yellow-tinged fingers tracing patterns on the reinforced glass as he gazed at the military transport ship, waiting to receive them. The Terran vessel Osprey looked brutish in comparison, all hard angles and utilitarian steel, its hull scarred from numerous combat deployments. Even from this distance, Gizzo could see the stark difference between their approach to design. Where the Auroras emphasized harmony and biological integration, the Osprey was purely functional, a testament to human pragmatism in the face of war. "We are really going in there?" Gizzo asked, his entirely black eyes reflecting the distant vessel. His elongated ears, nearly 15 centimeters in length, twitched slightly, a sign of discomfort among Zarians. "The Alliance needs our expertise on the front," Ambassador Daniel Wilson replied, his weathered human face showing signs of exhaustion. The war had taken its toll on everyone, but humans seemed to wear their fatigue more visibly than other species. "The casualties are mounting faster than their field medics can handle." Gizzo nodded, though doubt lingered in his mind. The Zarian Medical Academy was the most prestigious in the galaxy. Their techniques and technology were centuries beyond what Terrans employed. The idea of working in primitive field conditions seemed not just challenging, but almost insulting to his training. Behind him, the door to the observation deck slid open with a whisper. 3 figures entered, each representing a different species from the Galactic Alliance. Dr. Throck lumbered in first, his massive Gamoran frame barely fitting through the doorway. To human eyes, he resembled something from Earth's old folktales, what they might call a troll, with thick, gray-green skin and a prominent brow. Despite his intimidating appearance, Throck was known throughout the medical community for his delicate work in neural reconstruction. "Ambassador Wilson," Throck rumbled, his deep voice reverberating in the chamber. "We have reviewed your briefing materials. I must express concerns." Dr. Prilix followed, the Amfrost's amphibious body leaving faint moisture trails on the deck. Membranous gills fluttered at the sides of her neck, processing the ship's artificial atmosphere. "The conditions described are problematic," she said, her voice melodic but strained. "Our species is sensitive to blood sense and pressure variations. Field surgery may trigger autonomic responses." Last came Dr. Cathed, an aviar physician whose avian features included brilliant feathers in shades of blue, gold, and purple. His movements were quick and precise, his head tilting in that bird-like manner as he assessed the room. "We are trained for sterile environments, Ambassador, not battlefields." Wilson sighed, running a hand through his graying hair. "I understand your reservations, all of you, but the situation planetside is critical. We've lost 3 medical teams in the past week alone. Your knowledge could save thousands." Gizzo turned from the viewport, drawing himself to his full height, nearly 2 meters of slender, elegant Zarian physiology. "We will do our duty to the Alliance," he declared, though uncertainty churned within him. "But you must understand, our methods require precision instruments, controlled environments." "You'll have to adapt," Wilson replied simply. "This isn't about elegant procedures anymore. It's about keeping soldiers alive long enough to get them to proper facilities." The 4 alien doctors exchanged glances. They had all trained at the finest institutions, worked in the most advanced medical facilities throughout the galaxy. None had experienced the chaos of a battlefield hospital. "When do we depart?" Gizo asked. "Immediately," Wilson answered. "Gather your personal effects. Essential medical supplies have already been transferred to the Osprey." As they prepared to leave the sanctuary of the Auroras, Gizo took one last look at the medical bay he was leaving behind. The molecular regenerators, neural restoration arrays, and nanoscale surgical suites, all the tools that made Zarian medicine the envy of the galaxy, would remain here, safely orbiting far above the conflict zone. Instead, he would take only what could fit in a field kit: basic coagulants, broad-spectrum antibiotics, and rudimentary surgical implements. The thought made him physically uncomfortable. The transfer tube between the ships was stark and utilitarian, with none of the organic elegance of Zarian design. As they walked through, the difference became increasingly apparent. The soft amber lighting gave way to harsh white LEDs, the living walls replaced by cold metal bulkheads. Each step took them further from comfort and closer to the reality of war. Aboard the Osprey, a young human lieutenant met them. "Doctors, welcome aboard. I'll show you to the drop bay." "Drop bay?" Prilix asked, her gills fluttering anxiously. "Yes, ma'am. You'll be deploying via combat drop pod. It's the only way to get you safely through the contested airspace." Gizo felt his stomach tighten. Combat drop pods were notorious throughout the galaxy, essentially armored coffins designed to survive planetary entry and battlefield insertion. They were meant for soldiers, not medical personnel. The lieutenant led them through narrow corridors, past humans in battle armor, who regarded the alien physicians with mixtures of curiosity, hope, and skepticism. Finally, they reached a cavernous chamber where a massive pod waited, its exterior scarred from previous deployments. "This will take you directly to the forward medical station," the lieutenant explained. "Ambassador Wilson will accompany you to facilitate introductions." Throck stared at the pod, his massive hands clenching and unclenching. "This appears to be a weapon, not a transport." "It's both," Wilson admitted as he joined them. "The exterior is combat-grade armor, necessary for where we're going." Inside, the pod was cramped and utilitarian, with simple harnesses for each passenger. No comfort features, no amenities, just bare functionality. As they strapped in, Gizo noticed something that made his elongated ears twitch in alarm: a small container labeled Emergency Medical Kit. He flipped it open to find what humans considered essential: adhesive strips, gauze bandages, antiseptic spray, and a crude mechanical stapler for closing wounds. Gizo held up the stapler, aghast. "This is primitive," he whispered. "How can anyone heal with such basic tools?" Wilson secured his own harness. "Sometimes primitive is all you've got. The human body has remarkable healing capabilities, if you can just keep it from bleeding out long enough." Before Gizo could respond, the pod's hatch sealed with a pneumatic hiss. Red emergency lighting bathed the interior, casting everyone in a crimson glow that made them look as though they were already covered in blood. "Deployment in 30 seconds, announced an automated voice. "Prepare for gravitational compression." Prilix was already showing signs of distress, her gills working overtime. Throck's massive brow furrowed deeply, and Cathode had gone completely still, a defensive mechanism among Aviar when faced with extreme stress. The countdown reached 0, and the floor beneath them disappeared. The pod dropped from the Osprey's belly into the vacuum of space, momentarily weightless before the thrusters engaged. The journey to the planet's surface was a nightmare of noise and pressure. As they hit the atmosphere, the pod's exterior began to heat, the interior temperature rising despite the cooling systems. The gravitational forces pressed them into their seats at 3 times normal gravity, a sensation Gizo had never experienced and found immediately distressing. Alarms blared as the pod detected anti-aircraft fire in their vicinity. Evasive maneuvers sent them spiraling through the sky, each rotation threatening to empty Gizo's stomach. He closed his eyes, trying to recall the meditative techniques taught at the academy, but they seemed woefully inadequate for this situation. "Brace for impact!" Wilson shouted over the cacophony. The pod hit the ground with bone-jarring force, bounced twice, then skidded to a halt. For several seconds, no one moved or spoke. The red emergency lights flickered, then stabilized. "Everyone alive?" Wilson asked, already unbuckling his harness. Gizo managed a weak nod. Beside him, Prilix looked pale, her normally vibrant skin dulled by stress. Throck grunted, which Gizo took as affirmation. Cathod remained motionless, but his eyes were open and alert. "Welcome to Arawar," Wilson said as he punched the release for the hatch. "And welcome to the war." The hatch swung open, flooding the pod with natural light and a wave of sounds and smells that assaulted their senses. The thick, coppery scent of blood mixed with mud and the acrid tang of explosives. Screams and moans filled the air, punctuated by shouted orders and the distant rumble of artillery. Gizo stepped out onto soil that squelched beneath his boots, a mixture of mud and what he realized with horror was blood-soaked earth. Before them stood a massive tent structure, approximately 40 by 20 meters, constructed of weathered canvas, patched in dozens of places where shrapnel or bullets had torn through. "This is the forward medical station," Wilson explained, leading them toward the entrance. "It serves as the primary triage and emergency treatment facility for this sector." As they approached, the sounds of suffering grew louder. Gizo could see shadows moving inside, hurried figures rushing between what must be beds or treatment tables. "I should warn you," Wilson said, pausing before the entrance flap. "What you're about to see may be challenging. Human battlefield medicine isn't like what you're used to." With that inadequate warning, he pulled back the flap. The scene inside was beyond anything Gizo could have imagined. Hundreds of wounded soldiers, human, Thraxian, Wolverine, and even several captured Vatrax, lay on cots, stretchers, or directly on the ground. The space was chaotic, with no clear organization. Blood and mud covered everything, and the air was thick with the stench of antiseptic, bodily fluids, and death. Medical personnel moved between the wounded, their uniforms stained dark with blood and other fluids. One human doctor was using what appeared to be a mechanical saw to amputate a soldier's leg while the patient was still conscious, biting down on a leather strap. "Blood, mud. This isn't anything like what I've studied," Gizo whispered, his professional detachment crumbling in the face of such raw suffering. Throck shuddered visibly, his thoughts clearly returning to the operating theaters where he normally worked. Stable, sterile, controlled environments with every possible technological advantage. Prilix began to hyperventilate, her respiratory membranes contracting painfully from the combined assault of blood scent and humid air. Cathod stood frozen, taking deep, measured breaths as he tried to process the sight of a Terran doctor cauterizing a wound with what appeared to be a heated metal instrument. A human in blood-stained scrubs approached them, her face etched with exhaustion and irritation. "You must be the alien consultation team," she said, her tone making it clear she considered their presence an intrusion rather than assistance. "I'm Dr. Morrison. If you can't handle blood and guts, turn around now and go back to your pretty ship." Wilson stepped forward. "Dr. Morrison, these are some of the most accomplished physicians in the galaxy. They're here to help." Morrison's tired eyes swept over the 4 alien doctors, noting their obvious discomfort. "We don't need observers. We need hands that can work. Can you handle that?" Before any of them could answer, Prilix swayed and collapsed to the ground, overwhelmed by the sensory onslaught. Moments later, Throck's massive frame followed, his consciousness giving way to the shock. Cathod remained standing, but began trembling visibly, his feathers puffing outward in a clear stress response. Only Gizo remained upright, though he felt dangerously close to joining his colleagues on the ground. His professional pride battled with primal revulsion as he surveyed the nightmare around him. "Great," Morrison muttered. "Just what we needed." Through the haze of his shock, Gizzo's gaze fell on a young soldier nearby. Half the boy's face was seared with burn marks, his uniform soaked with blood and spattered with antiseptic chemicals. Despite his horrific injuries, the young man was conscious, staring up at the tent ceiling with what Gizzo recognized as hope in his eyes. "Doctor, please help me," the soldier called out, his voice weak but determined. Something shifted inside Gizzo at that moment. The reality before him shattered all preconceptions and professional pride. "If I don't act, his hope will die," he thought to himself. "Regardless of standards, I must treat him," Gizzo whispered. With newfound resolve, Gizzo knelt beside Prillix and hoisted her over his shoulder. "Wake up," he commanded, his voice stronger than he expected. "There's no time for fear. You can help these people." Slowly, Prillix's eyes fluttered open. This isn't medicine," she murmured. "This is battlefield medicine," Gizzo corrected her. "And you're still a doctor. Get up." He moved to Throck next, administering a mild stimulant from his personal kit. The massive Gamoran groaned as consciousness returned. "What? Where?" "We have work to do," Gizzo told him firmly. Cathid was still standing but needed support. Gizzo applied a calming agent to the aviar's neck feathers, and gradually his trembling subsided. "We must help them," Cathid said softly. Dr. Morrison had been watching this transformation with surprise. Her expression softened slightly, and she nodded. "All right, let's get to work. Barnes, get them adhesive, antibiotics, and basic kits." A female Terran medic, Casey, according to her name tag, approached with supplies. "Forget about sterile fields and deep irrigation," she explained rapidly. "We shoot them full of antibiotics and seal wounds temporarily. That's all we can do here." She demonstrated the proper use of the chemical adhesive, showing them how to roughly clean wounds with boiled saline solution and create temporary splints for broken bones. Gizzo set aside his years of refined training, discarding Zarian protocols in favor of speed and practicality. He found himself working faster than he'd ever worked before, moving from patient to patient with growing confidence. Throck carefully administered antibiotics, drawing out infection from wound sites with surprising dexterity for his large hands. Prillix learned to apply adhesive to human skin efficiently, her natural moisture production actually helping to clean wounds before sealing them. Cathid's small, precise hands proved excellent for cutting bandages and managing the finer aspects of wound care. Together, they began to make progress through the seemingly endless wave of injured. But the situation remained dire. A truck arrived from the perimeter, bringing more wounded from an outlying position. The numbers grew faster than they could treat them. Signs of antibiotic resistance began to appear in some patients, the telltale smell of infection advancing despite treatment. Several cases showed respiratory distress indicative of aquatic syndrome, a rare parasitic condition that thrived in battlefield conditions. As they worked frantically to stabilize the most critical cases, a Thraxian soldier with a chest wound began to struggle for breath. The temporary seal created with adhesive was failing, and internal bleeding threatened to drown him from within. At the same time, a young human with multiple crush injuries to the limbs required immediate attention to prevent compartment syndrome and tissue death. Time forced them to make painful choices about who to treat first. "The Thraxian won't survive another 10 minutes without intervention," Gizzo assessed quickly. "The human will lose limbs if we don't release pressure now," Throck countered. The intensity peaked as they tackled the Thraxian's case. Gizzo and Throck had to coordinate perfectly, one administering continuous antibiotics, while the other suctioned congealing blood from the wound tract. Prillix pulled Cathid to help triage less severe cases, clearing resources for the most critical situation. If I fail, his life ends. If I succeed, I prove that both Zarian and Terran medicine are just tools. Gizo thought as pressure mounted. His heart raced, sweat drenching his forehead despite the environmental controls in his lightweight armor. "Gizo, tighten that seal," Morrison shouted. "He needs oxygen now." "The pressure's too high," Prilix called out. "Thraxians can't handle this temperature." A brief but intense debate erupted. Should Gizo continue with the adhesive approach or switch to an open surgical intervention? In the midst of the crisis, Thrak had a revelation. He grabbed an antiseptic-soaked bandage, a hybrid approach combining Zarian precision with Terran practicality, and used it to reduce pressure on the wound while maintaining the seal. Using an old Zarian tissue separator they had brought along, they suctioned fluid while simultaneously applying the medical wicking material to create a temporary drainage system. For several tense moments, everyone held their breath. Then the Thraxian's hand twitched, and his breathing eased slightly. "He's stabilizing," Morrison confirmed. A collective sigh of relief spread through the team. In that moment of chaos, the merging of two medical traditions, not the dominance of either, had been the key to saving a life. With the Thraxians stabilized, they faced a new wave of casualties from a secondary explosion in a nearby sector. Dozens of severely wounded soldiers arrived, many with extensive burn injuries. Gizo and his team transitioned from addressing a single complex case to creating emergency bandages for treating contaminated burn wounds. The Terran nurses began showing new respect for the alien physicians. "Never thought they'd be able to blend Zarian techniques to save lives here," one commented quietly. Dr. Morrison nodded to Gizo. "You've taught me something. Medicine isn't about technology, but heart." A sudden downpour added to their challenges, driving more mud into the tent and creating hazardous conditions. The temperature dropped rapidly, overloading the artificial heaters. Gizo shivered slightly in the damp air, but continued working. The alien doctors found themselves growing more comfortable with their roles. Thrak gently eased pain for a young Wolverine female, using the combined adhesive bandage technique they had developed. Prilix used her natural moisture-producing ability to clean wounds for a human child, preventing infection more effectively than the standard approach. Cathed sang a soft lullaby that cut through the battlefield noise, helping a feathered adolescent remain calm as her wounds were treated. When the most urgent wave of casualties had been stabilized, the team of doctors collapsed in exhaustion at the corner of the tent, utterly spent, but with pride shining in their eyes. Gizo looked at Prilix, Thrak, and Cathed, seeing how they had transformed, from fear to readiness to fight for life. The following hours brought continued challenges as they settled into a rhythm of treating injuries, stabilizing patients, and preparing the most critical for evacuation to orbital facilities. The number of lives saved climbed steadily, from dozens of acute injuries to hundreds of temporarily stabilized patients. Outside, the battlefield quieted temporarily, allowing the medical staff to breathe easier as the flow of wounded slowed. Each of the alien doctors had undergone profound transformation. Gizo had journeyed from arrogance and judgment about primitive medicine to become a passionate physician who understood that whatever method preserves life is the right one. Thrak, initially terrified by the bloody conditions, now calmly amputated limbs to save lives, accepting the horrific surgery as necessary for a higher purpose. Prilix, once prone to fainting at the smell of blood, confidently cleaned wounds and administered antibiotics under pressure. Cathed had evolved from a shocked observer to a caregiver who provided emotional support while assisting with treatments. The relationship between species had shifted dramatically as well. Dr. Morrison addressed her Terran team. "Learn from their adaptability. The combination of techniques and spirit has saved more lives today than either approach alone would have." The Zarian Academy would receive a new report. Battlefield medicine curriculum must be integrated into standard training. As a temporary lull settled over the medical tent, Gizo found himself reflecting on the day's events. Tomorrow brings more challenges, he thought. But now I understand. Medicine is about life, not technology. The field tent's lights dimmed for the night shift, as alien and human medical staff prepared together for the next wave, united in their common purpose. 3 months later, the Auroras docked at Zarian Central Medical Station, returning from its extended mission to Arawar. Ambassador Wilson stood at the transfer tube as 4 alien doctors disembarked, changed in ways that went far beyond their physical appearance. Gizo led the group, his posture still elegant, but with a new confidence that came not from academic achievement, but from battlefield experience. His black eyes, once judgmental of lesser medical practices, now held wisdom beyond his years. "The Academy Council is eager to hear your report," the station administrator said as she greeted them. "Your techniques have already begun influencing combat medicine throughout the Alliance." Gizo exchanged glances with his colleagues. How could they possibly explain what they had learned? The fusion of Zarian precision with Terran practicality had created something entirely new, a hybrid approach that saved more lives than either tradition alone. "We have much to teach," Gizo replied, "and even more to learn." Behind them, a new group of alien physicians prepared to board the Auroras for their rotation to the front. They looked pristine in their medical uniforms, confident in their advanced training, just as Gizo and his team had once been. "A word of advice," Gizo told them as they passed. "When you arrive, forget everything you think you know. Watch the human doctors first. They've been practicing battlefield medicine for thousands of years. But their methods are primitive," one young Zarian doctor protested, echoing Gizo's own thoughts from months ago. "Primitive is relative," Throck rumbled. "Effective is absolute." As the new team departed, Prilix turned to Gizo. "Do you think they'll understand? Until you've seen it." "They'll learn," Gizo assured her, "just as we did." That evening, Gizo stood before the Academy Council, the highest medical authority in Zarian society. Their faces showed skepticism as he proposed radical changes to the curriculum, including mandatory field rotations with Terran combat units and integration of emergency adhesive techniques into standard training. "These methods lack precision," one council member objected. "They go against centuries of refined practice." "With respect," Gizo replied, "precision means nothing if the patient dies before you can apply it. I've seen Terran medics save lives with nothing but adhesive and determination. Our technology is remarkable, but their adaptability is unmatched." The council murmured among themselves, clearly uncomfortable with this challenge to established doctrine. "Perhaps a demonstration," Gizo suggested. He turned to Cathed, who activated a holographic projection showing their tent hospital on Arawar. The council members watched in stunned silence as the recording displayed the conditions, the mud, blood, and chaos, and the miraculous saves achieved with minimal resources. "This cannot be proper medicine," one whispered. "It is the most proper medicine I have ever practiced," Gizo countered, "because it served its ultimate purpose, preserving life." In the months that followed, medical curricula throughout the Alliance began to change. Zarian precision merged with Terran practicality, creating new protocols that could be adapted to any environment from pristine orbital facilities to muddy battlefield tents. Dr. Morrison herself was invited to lecture at the Zarian Academy, the first human to receive such an honor. Her hands, still rough from years of fieldwork, demonstrated techniques that had once been considered too crude for Zarian consideration. And on battlefields across the galaxy, mixed teams of physicians, human and alien alike, worked side by side, each learning from the other in service to a higher calling than cultural pride or technological superiority. 1 year to the day after their first deployment, Gizo and his original team gathered at a memorial erected near the site of that field hospital on Arawar. The war had finally ended, though the scars it left would take generations to heal. "I sometimes dream about it," Prilix admitted, her gills fluttering gently in the planet's humid atmosphere. The smells, the sounds. As do I, Throck agreed. But I also remember those we saved. Cathode nodded, his feathers catching the light of the setting sun. They called us the Fainting Four at first, he said, with a soft trill of amusement. By the end, they called us lifesavers. Gizo placed a hand on the memorial stone, which bore the names of those who had died before they could be saved. We came here believing we would teach them. Instead, we learned the most important lesson of all. What lesson? Asked a young voice. They turned to find a group of medical students, human and alien alike, watching them with reverence. These were the first graduates of the new integrated program, about to deploy to crisis zones across the galaxy. Gizo looked at these fresh faces, untested but eager, and saw his former self reflected in their confidence. But unlike his younger self, they had been trained in both traditions from the beginning, Zarian precision and Terran adaptability working in harmony. The lesson, he told them, is that medicine is not about who you are or what technology you possess. It's about the life in your hands at this moment, and what you're willing to do to preserve it. As the students absorbed his words, Gizo caught Dr. Morrison's eye across the gathering. The human physician nodded slightly, a gesture of respect between equals who had witnessed both the worst and the best that sentient beings could offer one another. The sun set over Erowar, casting long shadows across ground that had once been soaked with blood, but now sprouted new growth. Like the planet itself, medicine throughout the galaxy was healing, growing, and becoming stronger through diversity rather than division. And somewhere in the vastness of space, another medical tent was being erected on another battlefield. But this time, the doctors who entered it, whether human or alien, would do so not with fear or judgment, but with the knowledge that together they could face whatever horrors awaited them inside. For that was the true legacy of the alien medics who had once fainted at the sight of a human medical tent. Not that they had fallen, but that they had risen again, forever changed by what they had experienced, and determined to ensure that the lessons they had learned would never be forgotten. As night fell on Erowar, Gizo looked up at the stars, knowing that the Auroras was out there somewhere, carrying a new team to some distant crisis. He hoped they would remember his advice when they arrived. Technology can fail, resources can be depleted, but compassion, adaptability, and cooperation will save lives when nothing else can. And in the end, wasn't that what medicine, all medicine, regardless of its origin, was truly about? The universe, with all its wisdom, seemed to whisper back, yes. And that was enough. Decades passed, and the story of the Fainting Four became legend throughout the medical communities of the Galactic Alliance. It was taught in classrooms and simulation chambers, recounted during difficult deployments, and whispered among new recruits as they prepared for their first field rotations. Gizo eventually returned to the Zarian Academy, not as a practitioner, but as its director, where he oversaw the complete reformation of medical education. Under his guidance, students trained not only in the pristine laboratories for which Zarian medicine was famous, but also in simulated battlefield conditions, learning to improvise when technology failed. Throck established the first Gamoran Field Surgery Corps, a specialized unit that deployed to natural disasters and conflict zones throughout the galaxy. His massive hands, once considered too large for delicate procedures, became symbols of hope on dozens of worlds. Prilix revolutionized emergency triage protocols by incorporating amphibious sensory techniques into diagnostic procedures. Her ability to detect subtle chemical changes in patients, originally an evolutionary adaptation of her species, became standard training for all emergency physicians. Cathed developed a comprehensive psychological support methodology for battlefield medicine, recognizing that healing the mind was as crucial as healing the body. His gentle songs became the foundation for sound therapy treatments, now used throughout Alliance medical facilities. And Dr. Morrison, the human physician who had initially greeted them with skepticism, became the first Terran appointed to the Interspecies Medical Exchange, where she helped bridge the gap between human pragmatism and alien precision. Together, they had changed the face of medicine across the galaxy, not through technological breakthroughs or miraculous discoveries, but through something far more powerful: the willingness to learn from one another. On the anniversary of the Battle of Arawar, medical facilities throughout the Alliance observed a moment of silence, not just for those who had been lost, but in recognition of what had been gained. In that silence, practitioners of all species remembered that medicine was not defined by the tools one used, but by the lives one touched. And in a small field hospital on a distant planet, where a new conflict threatened to tear apart another world, 4 young doctors, 1 Zarian, 1 Gamoran, 1 Amfrost, and 1 Aviar, worked alongside their human colleagues with neither fear nor judgment, but with the shared understanding that had begun in that mud-soaked tent so many years ago. When the casualties poured in, they did not faint. They did not hesitate. They simply did what needed to be done, using whatever tools were available, from advanced molecular regenerators to simple adhesive strips, guided not by pride or tradition, but by the fundamental principle that had united their predecessors. Life in all its forms was worth fighting for. And in that truth, the legacy of the alien medics who once fainted at the sight of a human medical tent lived on, transforming not just medicine, but the very fabric of interspecies cooperation throughout the stars. As Gizo had once said, standing in the ruins of that first battlefield hospital, the greatest medical advancement is not a device or a procedure, but the moment when we set aside our differences to recognize the value of all approaches in service to life itself. And across the vast expanse of the galaxy, as countless beings breathed another day because of what had begun there, that advancement continued to spread, one life at a time.